Welcome people. We're just waiting for a few others to join us and we'll get going in about 30 seconds or a minute. Still got a few more coming in. Looks like it's stopped. No, a few more coming in. Right, we'll get underway anyway. It's 12 o'clock. Welcome everybody. Welcome to this webinar in conjunction with Fletcher Building Hazends. So I'm Philip Aldridge, Executive Director at Hazends. I'll be your host today. Today's webinar is Fletcher Building Lessons from COVID-19 and Opportunities and Challenges over the next 3 to 6 months. So Wendy Croft will be shortly talking about this. So welcome, Wendy. So in terms of logistics, so the presentation will be about 25-30 minutes. You have an opportunity to ask questions, particularly at the second half of the session. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. So if you click your questions there anytime throughout the session and submit them in. Any technical issues, just use chat. So yeah, thanks for that. Welcome aboard and over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Philip. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to sort of share some stories with you. I really do think safety and health is a lot about storytelling. So I promise you there's slides, but there'll be a lot of storytelling along the way. So I'm Wendy Croft. I'm the Chief Health and Safety Officer here at Fletcher Building. I'll introduce Fletcher Building in a little bit more detail in a second for those of you who aren't familiar with us or who think we're a construction firm. That might be a good one too. So my role here is I report into the Chief Executive Officer, Ross Taylor, and sit alongside the rest of the executive team, governing and overseeing health and safety across Fletcher Building. And obviously from my funny accent, and for those of you who are out there who probably know me, I'm from Canada originally. My background is varied, but I've worked in multiple industries across the world and ran a number of different programs across various governments and organizations. So look, let me crack into it. Fletcher Building, I think, is sort of first up. What I'll do is I'll introduce the organization as a whole. I'll go through a high level sort of COVID-19 experience and learning, and then I'll get into some of what I call managing myths and preventing madness, as well as the great concept of never wasting a good crisis. And I'll finish a bit on the mental health iceberg that I see coming. And I'm sure you see it as well. So without further ado, here is Fletcher Building. We're divided into about we are divided into 6 divisions. So we've got Australia, which has a number of mainly building products and distribution businesses. We've got construction, which you're probably most familiar with, and Fletcher Construction itself is quite a beast. It's got a vertical and horizontal build, as well as the Brian Perry and the Higgins and the likes to do infrastructure and maintenance. We've got our residential businesses. Those of you familiar with Fletcher Living, but you may not be familiar with Clevercore, which we stood up last year. It's an off-site manufacturing facility, which is really quite exciting. We've got building products as a division here in New Zealand as well. And you can see there from the list of businesses that it's quite a family and quite some complex risks through that. We've got concrete, which is basically the early stages of that supply chain from Golden Bay, Whinstone Aggregates through Golden Bay Cement and out through Firth. And we've got distribution, which is Placemakers, and Myco, and the like. So 15,000 roughly employees across Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. The way that we're structured, because I know, given the audience and who's on this call, you'd be keen to know how we're structured from a health and safety perspective. Look, we mirror the operational organization, which is, I'm a firm believer, you've got to mirror what you've got in an organization. So each of these divisions have a chief executive, and standing alongside them is a head of health and safety. All of those heads of health and safety report into those chief executives with a dotted line into myself, just as the chief executives report into Ross Taylor, sitting above this group of divisions. Each of the business units have a health and safety manager and a team of advisors and professionals to support them. So we do have, workplace injury specialists and some others, but predominantly we're a structure of management down to advisor level within each of these organizations. I don't think it's right to talk about, go straight from the business and go into COVID-19 without actually talking about us in our health and safety context. Look, I've been with Fletcher Building now for 2 years, and it's been, and needless to say, it's been an interesting journey. Shortly after taking on the reins in October 2019, we had a fatality in our building products division, and in particular Fletcher Reinforcing in Levin, and that was my first real tragedy within the organization, and a real learning experience for the organization. Not that it was our first fatality, but it was first under Ross's and I's leadership. And it was unfortunately followed by another one shortly after Christmas. That was November 26th. Shortly after Christmas, we had another one January 16th within the Easy Steel business. And it was followed by the triple fatality in Higgins in February, which you're probably most familiar with because it certainly made the news and was heart-wrenching and very difficult time for everybody, including the Rotorua community. So look, on the back of all of that, we've been on quite the journey. And what I'm just sharing with you in front of you is the roadmap to our success. It's a culture change program, so it's not a quick and, there's no golden arrow to something like this. We had systems, we had processes, we had training just like everybody else. But there was obviously something we were missing as an executive. So we brought in DuPont Sustainable Solutions to partner with us and take us on that next leg. And we broke ourselves down into 5 work streams, 3 of which were people related and 2 of which are process related, as you can see there. And one of the questions that has come through that you guys want to sort of have an understanding of is, what do we mean when we say leadership? So this reset, this strategy is very much led by the executive. So in terms of leadership, there's definitely that. And this is probably the first time in my professional career that I've seen true executive leadership. This is not my program. This is not an EHS program. This is very much the executive-led program because they simply have come to that awareness. We can't have another fatality. We need to do something drastic. So what we've got in front of you there is quite a ambitious cultural shift that we need to do through shifting mindsets and believing all injuries are preventable, but also developing our leaders. And when we talk about leaders there, we're talking about anybody who leads a group of people or an activity. So there's a huge number of leaders across our organization, as you can imagine. Everyone from executive and GM to GM-1, people managers and frontline managers and supervisors. So there's a huge piece of work being done there around shifting our culture and awareness and understanding and actually getting our line to lead, not footballing it off to the safety team, as happens in most organizations, and enabling the front line. So I'm not going to go into all of these work streams because that's not the purpose of today's meeting, but I wanted to give you the lens of where our leadership were feeling and the sentiment that they had. They were very much all present and very active in the space of leading from the top, with a lot of felt leadership, a lot of authenticity, and a lot of care, and a strong focus on managing critical risks. So that's sort of the context as we go into this and as I start to share with you more about our own experience. So in terms of COVID-19, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody. With this, the only way to really do it was to go early, go hard, which is what New Zealand did as well. But the graph that you're seeing on here was us going a bit earlier even than the government made us. So January 11th is when we started to put into place requirements for self-isolation where we had suspected potential cases or exposure to risk in terms of international travel or other cases that were out there. Bit of a funny story. While we all were watching COVID travel around the world, as you can remember, towards the end of February, as an executive team, we had booked an innovation trek across California to really start lifting our strategic game and learn from what was going on across Silicon Valley and other areas. And we did debate canceling that. But when we first, when we left New Zealand, it was very much isolated to Italy, I think, and China. And as you know, it rapidly changed throughout that week. And so here we were in a bus traveling to a site in California and literally huddled around my laptop as we decided what were going to be our controls, our immediate restrictions and controls around travel and gatherings in Australia and New Zealand. And the irony was not lost on us that here we were trying to get our butts to an airport and get back to New Zealand as quickly as we could, and being overseas while we were telling people not to go anywhere. And we had people traveling to Texas and all kinds of places in terms of conferences and development, and all of that had to stop. But what was positive in that space was it was very much a conversation around the executive. It wasn't, you know, EHS or even the comms team or even the risk team coming out and saying, this is what we're going to do. It was very much an open conversation amongst the executive with full debate back and forth about, you know, is the gathering less than 25 people, less than 50 people? What do we think about that? And what were we seeing in California actually played a role in that, because we were seeing it start to emerge there. So it was quite interesting, but certainly we had to go hard and go early and be consistent. Now, while we've got Australia being in a different place certainly now, at that time, the risk was quite unknown. And so we just decided to go conservative, putting our people first and saying we just didn't want to put them at risk. And so we basically went into lockdown ourselves in terms of people being allowed to travel between facilities, between sites, going to site. We started people working from home quite quickly in that space. And I think that was the right decision. It was absolutely the right decision. And then following on from that, you know, as we went into lockdown and started to come out, we very much pivoted to talk about it like a critical risk, a potentially fatal risk that we needed to manage. And that certainly worked to our advantage as well, to make sure everything was really clear and very simple. And the other suggestion I'd have is that we treated it like any other health exposure. So all of these little dots that you see here, and we had 425 plus people who went into self-managed isolation up till now. They were treated very much like a return to work. So what is your health status? You know, what are the professionals saying? Have you called the health line of your GP clearance to come back to work, etc.? And so I think leaning on those existing processes was beneficial. Here's a couple of photos out on site. You know, the guys doing their toolbox talks with the 2-meter spacing as we had it when we came out of level 4 in New Zealand into level 3. We had all the mandatory controls you'd expect. And the guy on the left-hand side, you can see he's got his little cleaning bottle and he's wiping down his plant in between shifts and throughout the day. But I think probably the better story to tell here, the more important story that might be unusual, is a lot of our guys came back and said what really made a difference is the why. And that has helped us too as we think about our critical risks. The why was really obvious. If you think about across Australia and New Zealand and the world right now, you know, the fear around getting COVID, and we don't feel it so much right now because we're the fortunate position that we are in at level 1. But that fear of getting the illness and taking it back to our families, and we were able to lead with a lot of care, you know, and we talked about extending our bubbles from our home to our workmates and keeping our workmate bubbles small, because then we could protect our home bubble as well. And so a lot of that why really translated, and even when we had a high contractor base, it was easier to get the why across. And that also helped our supervisors make really clear and simple decisions. So for example, one of our team had a crew rock up, a contractor crew rock up on site, and there was 3 of them in the car and they were all sitting close together. And the question became, wait a second, you guys are supposed to be, you know, keeping your distances. What's going on? Turns out they're from a family bubble, but they all seemed a bit off. And the guy, when he questioned them, found out that they actually were sick with a bit of a fever, sore throat. And he made the quick decision, you don't even get out of the car, you turn around and go home and you rest until you're better. So I think empowering people with the why and the understanding of how the disease worked really made a big difference. So now we'll get into a bit of the managing myths and preventing madness. I think a lot of the health and safety professional world can, I took a great course back in Canada years and years ago called risk communication. And there is a lot of it in that space. You know, how you communicate can either make people more afraid or make them less afraid, make them better able to manage or less able to manage either as an individual or as a management team. So one of the first things, you know, we had to do was support our management. They need to be empowered with knowledge and guidance because they were having to make decisions on the fly right away. And in the absence, in the vacuum of knowledge, you know, becomes chaos and fear. And so we really need to empower our managers with how to manage these situations. And I mean, you guys probably had this as well, but we had those situations where it was like, well, my cousin's uncle's nephew, you know, has the virus, and I saw him last weekend, or I sat with him and he didn't seem very good, and I don't know if he's got it now. And, you know, and there was other ones where my wife works at the district health board, and should I still be coming to work? Or, you know, there was a huge variety of things. We had suspected cases on site. You know, the guy was sick. How do you respond to that? Do you lock the whole place down? Do you clean it up right away? He hasn't been confirmed yet. When he is confirmed, what do you do? I mean, there was a lot of variability in terms of the situations we were presented with. So one of the first things we needed to do is give the managers a way to respond. We did that using international best practice that we could find, but then tailoring it to what we knew the district health boards and the New Zealand and Australia governments were doing, what the guidance was coming out of World Health Organization. We came up with a couple of flow charts. One is the personal response plan, which you can just see an image of here. And the other one was a management response plan, which helps guide them through, you know, how do you communicate to your people? When do you shut down a site? How long do you have to have it clean? Or how do you clean it? How long do you have it cleaned for before you bring people back? How do you manage all these various situations? So those became quite a Bible for our people, and became quite powerful and quite important. And as we learned, you know, we sort of added and modified it, but you know, I'm pretty proud to say our team got it pretty close to right on right at the beginning, so we didn't have to do a lot of change, which, as you can imagine, across 26 businesses or 24 businesses and 15,000 people, you can't do a lot of change at top. It has quite a ripple effect, so we had to get it right first. So that was quite good. And you know, a lot of the squeaky noise went away quite quickly when we empowered management with good guidance. The other thing was to encourage them to keep the messaging really simple to the people. And what you're seeing here is actually an Australian poster, because Australia, for those of you who are familiar, went with 1.5 meters. Now, as a health professional, I sort of got stuck on this for just a second, I'll be honest, but I did get stuck on it. Wait a second, we've got 2 meters. At the time, we had 2 meters in New Zealand and 1.5 meters being publicized in Australia. And when you look across to North America, they were looking at 6 feet, you know, which is slightly different again. And so we had to sort of think about it. If you were looking at a critical risk, which is how we were treating it, you would normally go with what is the safest practice, what is global best practice. And it wasn't really clear. And we had the World Health Organization saying 1 meter was okay. So it wasn't really clear, but what was important in this space for us was actually being consistent with government. So, and we learned that a little bit from the grocery industry, who was active during level 4 for New Zealand, and the fact that, you know, they actually had early intel, I believe, that they could go to 1.0 meters, but that would have been confusing for the public who've been told 2 meters. So it was quite important to just be consistent. You know, it may not be perfect, but at least we're consistent, and that way it was easy for our people. So we didn't have different requirements in Australia versus New Zealand. We just said, if it's 1.5 meters in Australia, then that's what we'll go with. It just reduced any confusion on site. And we needed to be really clear and keep it as a simple rule. And I think probably one of the biggest ones, and you guys have probably dealt with this a lot as well, was the elephant in the room around face masks. And we saw it emerging really quickly. You know, here we were in this bus in California as San Francisco went into emergency lockdown, and we were trying to get to an airport. And everyone turned to me and said, should we be out buying face masks? And that question still plagues countries and governments to today. I have to say I was really proud and pleased personally with the stance that New Zealand took and continues to take around being science-based. I actually do have a lot of discomfort with North America going heavily to face masks, but that's a long debate we can have someday. In terms of the approach we took, we very much publicized alongside the government saying you should only have a face mask and PPE when you actually need to be within the 2 meters or the 1 meter, as it came to be, in terms of proximity to other people at your workplace. Then we'll provide you with extra protection, because that's when you're in closer contact. But beyond that, please leave them for the health professionals that do need them. And I think that was really important to keep that really clear and communicated quite widely, because it did have the potential to unstick us. And become a contentious place where people then didn't trust any of the controls you put into place if you weren't really clear and people were doing different things in different areas. So watch this space. I'm sure that one will continue to unfold. But as you know, in the health profession, you know, people are wearing one mask all day, reusing it the next day. You've got all the issues with seals. You've got the issues with moisture. I mean, it's fraught with issue. That brings me into never wasting a good crisis. I think that's a great quote by Winston Churchill, and I certainly used it a lot. But firstly, I think we continue to hear, and hopefully you're hearing as well, and my experience is a crisis really brings people together. And well, we know no one likes a crisis, and we seem to have our fair share number of them across New Zealand in particular, but it does bring people together. There's something about it that really, it means you have to lean on each other and be a bit more vulnerable and have a little bit more authenticity and conversation around real true impact, and you have to really bring your all to that group, and it makes you work differently. So a lot more spontaneity perhaps in how you're meeting, or more frequency. I think a lot of teams started meeting daily, and that really brought them together. So this is just a snapshot of my wee little team at one point having a bit of a round table on Teams, but we certainly have heard that it's brought people together. Our challenge now is how to sustain that as we go into, as we're talking post-COVID and the economic downturn. It's going to be quite challenging.
Wendy, Philip here. A couple of quick questions. How often did you meet? And secondly, did you measure the difference in culture or engagement, for a better word?
Good questions. How often did we meet? So the executive, we went into crisis mode as everybody did. So our crisis management team was stood up and we were meeting at one point daily, and then it turned into every 2 days. And we had to have a flow on to the divisional crisis management teams who were meeting on the alternate days. So that's our cadence in terms of as we met as a crisis. Our teams all went into onto the what we call the bridging pay program when we took up the government subsidy, as was well publicized. And so while the team didn't have to work, we didn't want them to work because we didn't want to generate a group. What happens if we work, we generate work for the divisions and business units who aren't working. We really were trying to stand everybody down for that 4-week period. But what we did instead is we just had little gatherings. And to be honest, a lot of the team, and you guys probably experienced this as well, a lot of the team actually wanted to work. It felt rather purposeless for a lot of people not working. And so a lot of the team still quietly puttered away. And so it was still good to keep in touch. So the team, my little band of warriors, had regular catch-ups once a week. And then actually we started instigating Friday night get-togethers, which included cocktails, but it was bring your own, obviously. But then you got to share stories of, well, what are you drinking? Or what did you make? And what are you having for dinner? And it actually did bring people together. But in terms of through the crisis, we absolutely continued to work, and we had that crisis management flow that we had to have in terms of regular cadence.
Great, thanks.
In terms of never let out, this is a quote that I just kept using every time I met with people. So particularly with our IT team, who really stood up and came to the party over the COVID crisis time. They came to the party quite early, and I'll share with you in a second, in an app that we developed quickly to help support communications and well-being, but also in terms of contact tracing. I mean, they stood up their own. I mean, we looked at a lot of number of different providers, and they ended up standing up their own just as quickly as any of the providers could in terms of QR codes and tracing. And it's actually a much better system than we could have found externally. So anyway, they were really coming to the party. But I also said, look, as you're looking at these things, and I said this to the divisions as well, as you're looking at these issues you're trying to solve around, you know, physical distancing, contact tracing, access on site, hygiene. If you're looking at any of these things, flow of traffic through your workplaces, start to think about what other problems you can solve along the way and lock them in if you can. So if I think about, for example, you guys are all probably familiar with placemakers, very similar to a Bunnings or Mitre 10 if you've been to those. You know, the flow of members of public coming in to load up lumber and product and all sorts of pipes and various things in the yard. You know, COVID gave us the chance to really lock that down. People couldn't get out of their vehicles. They had to hand in their slips early, get their their orders confirmed in advance on either phone or online, click and collect. And so what I encourage them to do is, how much can you lock in this new behavior that you've got, where people aren't wandering around near forklifts and outside their vehicles when we're loading. So trying to lock in some of these behaviors as things went along. But also using it as an opportunity, as we did, I think, in our resi business, residential, sorry, what's it, lingo, but residential division. It was a lot around, access to site. We were looking at 5G, but actually this gave us an opportunity to try a different technology, Bluetooth or QR codes, to control our sites a little bit better. There was also this idea of accelerating the use of automation and virtualization. The image you see there is just a product, Atology, I think it's called, that we're looking to pilot in one of our divisions, I think in concrete. And it's just, they've come up with it, and I saw Ports of Auckland had a bit of a one with a halo as well on a wristband, this idea of physical distancing. But surely if you can do physical distancing and moving people, you can do mobile plant and people moving. And it's the same sort of technology to sort of warn or vibrate on someone's wrist to say, you've got an issue here. So trying to encourage us to use the emerging, because the tech world has really come in behind COVID and really pushing hard for innovation. And so let's use that groundswell and see what other problems we can solve along the way. And the other thing that I sort of was able to get out of this crisis was, as I started out talking about the journey we've been on with health and safety and getting the executive very much aligned on where we want to go. Do we believe all injuries are preventable? This is line-led with frontline involvement and a critical risk focus. That critical risk focus, by using that for COVID, I got our executive aligned and familiar with the new process I wanted them to undertake for critical risk. And that included, what are our critical controls associated with that? And what are the verification processes we're going to have on every single site across Fletcher Building that can then be reported up to them to give them confidence that they've got that risk under control. And look, we launched that really quickly, and within days we had online reporting at 95% of our sites being evaluated, and at 98% at the initial, and now 99% completion of those mandatory controls around COVID. And so that just helped pull that process through, where you could be like, get the executive aligned on, because you have their full attention when you're going through a crisis. So using that as an opportunity to then say, and this will be our new way of working, but now you're familiar with it. And that sort of brings me to the mental health side of things, which, is dear to most people, I would think, on this call, dear to a lot of our hearts. And most of us have spent some time on this. But I'll take you through sort of some of the things that we did as part of this. When we heard we were going into lockdown, I think we heard on a Thursday, we were actually worried more about Australia going to lockdown before New Zealand, and then New Zealand came quite quickly, as you'll remember. So on the Friday, we discussed as a crisis management team, and said, oh my God, we're going into lockdown in Australia, is what we thought first. How are we going to, support our people? What is the well-being we could give them? And look, Ross, our CEO, threw out an idea. He was like, look, I'm happy to do whatever we need to do. What if we stood up a bunch of, professionals, I don't know, a bunch of people on our side and group that could be, support for others, if they want to call in and get advice on, I don't know, finances or well-being, what could we stand up? So it was sort of his challenge. And look, I quickly turned that into, we don't have the professionals in-house for all of that. And we shouldn't be giving that kind of advice, but actually we can put people in touch with the right advice, and that's what apps do. So the IT team, within 3 days, and we partnered with a great little New Zealand company to really stand this one up fast. And we did it, we had to do it simple. It couldn't have personal logins. It had to be one generic FB login and, things like that. But we were able to stand up really, really fast and link people to amazing resources across New Zealand and across Australia. And including, extra funding for welfare, which we stood up. About 100K plus has been given out for that now to about just over, I can't remember how many thousands of people. And, and then links to the EAP, links to volunteers in the background who could help. And then we started to realize that it was an amazing communication tool. For a lot of our people, they're not on our what we have as an internal intranet. Though a lot of them aren't on that. They unwired, as we call them. They don't have access to computers. They're on the tools all day, but most of them have mobile phones, so they could download this, get updates from Ross and from the executive on where are we tracking, what's coming next, give them access to the payroll team to monitor their leave and give them updates on COVID and FAQs they had and a whole bunch of stuff. So it was really, really successful. The comms team is now looking at what do we do with this going forward, because actually it was more successful than most of our communication tools. So how do we continue to promote it? We've added things like, you know, what are the FB discounts with different businesses? How do we promote those? So there's a lot of different things we can do with it now, but it was really quite powerful. And what we noticed immediately is the noise into our email inboxes from the business dropped off almost immediately. We no longer had, you know, the COVID questions coming in. We no longer had the payroll questions flooding us, etc. So that was really quite a powerful and important aspect. And while it was done with well-being in mind, it actually, you know, served a wider purpose associated with people's well-being, which was certainty, clarity, communication. We also partnered with JK, and you're probably familiar now with the Mentamia app. We also worked out with JK and the team how to do that in Australia, and we've had great uptake of it. And the leadership all got behind it. We did a big video with Ross and a bunch of us sort of talking about our own well-being and how we're doing and promoting it for our people, and it's got some great resources. So again, in the space of well-being, we're doing a lot of promoting, we're doing a lot of, you know, 5 ways of well-being and all the great stuff, providing some hardship funding and connecting people to great resources and great support. So from a well-being and health perspective, you feel like we're ticking all the boxes. But look, I think for those of us who work in this space, for those of us who have personal experience in this space, we know that, you know, the well-being and that aspect of it is great and so important. And opening up the "Are you okay?" and having those conversations and making it really an okay place to have these conversations around the executive table or around any table or any smoker room across the organization. But this really was hit home for me as I sort of thought about all our people. And you've seen the numbers, you know, 1,500 redundancies is what we were looking at across Australia and New Zealand, and not too dissimilar to most organizations. And you think about the impact on those individuals, and not just that, but, you know, going through lockdown and that feeling of uncertainty and fear and lack of purpose and structure and routine in your lives. We didn't see the mental health numbers jump immediately. We're waiting now to see where they've gone. If you look across New Zealand, we're starting to see those spikes in Australia. But personal experience, I'd never come so close to mental illness as I did through this last 6 weeks, 2 months. I had 2 members of my family who came down quite unwell. One who just couldn't stop crying, and when it's your child, it's pretty hard to watch and comfort them. And the other one who became incredibly suicidal and diagnosed with minor to moderate major depressive. But in this particular case, you know, the medications just made it awful and quite unbearable in terms of the side effects, which they all have, which says you could have suicidal tendencies. Well, take that and ratchet it up about 100 times. And it was a moment of awakening, I think, a little bit for me, although I've, you know, promoted well-being and mental awareness and done work with the Mental Health Foundation and all sorts of great areas. But when it's actually a family member and you're trying to be their support and you're calling the crisis line and you're meeting with psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs, you start to realize how our health system just isn't ready for this. And especially when it comes to the support network that these individuals, our people, will need. People who suffer from the mental illness, it's hard, but the people who support them, you know, there's just not that much there for the rest of them, the rest of us, in terms of how we support that whole framework as well. And yeah, so I think that was a moment of awakening. And the more, you know, I'm back at work now and talking to people, and I'm not alone, there's a lot of people in this position. And are we really ready for this? You know, both internally within FB, are we ready for this? It's not just a well-being app that's going to solve it. It's, you know, can we work with government agencies to improve the offering, improve the capability and understanding out there between GPs and the crisis line, and the capability there was really disappointing, if I'm honest. So I think it's been a bit of a moment. We knew it was coming. We were all talking about it coming. We know it's out there. But I think having the personal experience now with how difficult it can be, and how much we really do need the support networks to function as best they can, I think is really hitting home for me. So I think that sort of wraps it up for me, but I think that's probably beyond the post-COVID, you know, how do we pivot economically and for our business? Certainly the well-being space and the mental illness space is going to be an area that I think is going to need a bit of attention by us as professionals. So that sort of brings me to the end of what I wanted to share with you. And I think now, Philip, we can probably open it up to questions either from yourself or others.
Yeah, do you want to, thank you for that, Wendy, and thank you for your openness and sharing your personal story. It doesn't sound particularly nice, and hope it all works out for your family. I'm sure lots of people, as you see, are experiencing the same angst and worry for these times. A couple of questions before we go into the, coming from the emails previous to the session. So Fletcher Building does a lot with subcontractors. How are you managing health and safety through them during this time, you know, during various alert levels?
Yeah, good question. So the contractor base, and I meant to speak to this at the beginning when I talked about our framework and how we're thinking about it. Our contractor base is massive for us, obviously, and we're treating them very much, there's twofold sort of treatment of them. The frontline piece that I talked about before in terms of involving our frontline, the shift in philosophy we've got is our contractor base is our frontline. Whether they're an employee or a contractor, they're still a worker that works with us. So we're treating them all equally in that space, although the mechanisms are slightly different. It's the same philosophy. And we're dealing directly with our contractor management teams in terms of how do we bring everybody back and all of that. And the logistics of it are not small, but I think the team have done a pretty decent job of trying to keep everybody on the same wavelength. Yep.
Just a couple of questions here, the sort of similar theme. How bad has Fletcher been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? May not be a comment on the number of job losses.
Yeah, look,
have you got any sort of thoughts on that, or what's likely to happen?
Look, I'm pretty happy to share with, but it's probably not news to anybody. Look, we have announced that there are 1,500 job losses coming that we can predict. We are looking at, as everybody is in the building and construction industry, anywhere between 20 to 30% downturn that will probably take us to 12 or 18 months. So that's not a particularly nice thing to be looking at. And I have to say it's pretty hard on the team to be thinking about that when, as we came back out of lockdown, it wasn't that we weren't busy. You know, we were a bit busy, but we can see that. I think it's that image that the New Zealand Herald had. They had a great article in the business section a week or so ago with, you know, Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff. And I think that was very much the feeling that we've got is we're running really hard, but we don't know what's going to drop out under us. So we are predicting a 20 to 30% downturn. So that's the process we're going through right now, is how do we prepare ourselves for that?
There's one coming via chat. Thanks, Derek. Keen to understand any strategies you used, aside from fatalities, to get high-level engagement from the executive team.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'll share a little DuPont secret that I think is absolutely amazing. What we did is we did a full assessment, and the assessment process that we went through wasn't an audit. You know, your classic send somebody in who's external and do an audit and tell everybody how much they suck. It was actually a process whereby we partnered up and we brought people out of line for 6 weeks, and we took our top EHS professionals and our top line people, and we partnered them alongside DuPont. So there was 4 people in each division that did a deep dive down into the organization for 6 full weeks and really listened to the people and brought back. And what they did is not a report back to us, but what they bring back is a mirror walk. They hold up a mirror to us. They hold up a mirror to the executive team and tell us what people are saying, what they're hearing, the way that they're feeling, and some of the comparisons against global best practice. And that had the biggest impact. You know, we could see that while we had fatalities in 2 divisions, nobody was immune to this. Our issues from culture and perception were equal across everywhere. And actually it was ownership back, because it's been reflected back to us, and then it's on us to come up with the plan. And I actually have to say, I think most of our audits should move back into that space, because it was powerful and it worked amazingly well.
Cool. Just building on the mental health theme, question from Mark. Are you looking to collaborate with others for shared learnings, ideas on industry mental health management?
Yeah, great idea. Like I said before, I think I'd like to partner with whoever wants to partner, and I'm very keen to partner with government agencies as well, because I think that's where the rubber's going to hit the road, to be honest. We as organizations can only do so much. We're very reliant on the health system to support people, and we need them to do that. So I'm keen to partner with whoever is willing and interested, but I do think government needs to be involved.
Cool. Question here. Given the recent experience, are we better prepared for another potential pandemic?
I don't know. I'm certainly, I think as long as we lock in the learnings like you do with anything, I think as a country and as individuals and as organizations, we're better prepared. Unfortunately, I heard a stat the other day that we're going to get one of these every 10 years now. So let's hope we're locking in the learnings.
Exactly. Question here. People thrive in an environment where they have intentionally created health promotion. How are you going to involve your teams ensuring health promotion is meeting your needs?
Health promotion?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. It is interesting because when you have that app and you link them up to all these different promotional health things, is it really serving a purpose? And that's one of the reasons we're kind of keen on the Mentomia app, for example. It gives you data and intel out of the back of it in terms of, how are people, is it actually working and is it effective? It is a great question. I think we're not great as an organization to really, or as a country and as an industry to really look at, are these things successful? There's a lot of great stuff out there, but how successful are they? I think it comes down, personally, my experience is it comes down to individuals and their willingness to uptake them. And then on those promotions to be something palatable and adaptable.
Here's one around mental well-being and mental health. The question is really around the first step is to identify and address the psychological risk factors to enable a strategic approach. Is that something Fletcher Building plan to do?
Yeah, the psychological risk factor profile stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And we've done that in the past already. And we're certainly doing that, and we're very aware of that profile that's emerging as we're laying people off. The challenge I've got is, the people who need it the most are the people we're having to let go. And I can only support them for so long once they're gone. And hence my push on the government agencies to be more supportive. And
a comment really from Barbara, great idea with the COVID app, providing links to people somewhere hard to find, like civil offence or other things at level 4. So it's a comment from Barbara. Thanks for that, Barbara. There's a comment coming through via chat, Deidre, saying, but building is going nuts in Manawatu too. Our builders can't keep up. So have you got any comment around, or you may not know in your role, but do you comment around what's going around the country, what you've seen, what you'd like to see?
Yeah, look, my role as an executive or as part of the business leadership is that I have to be a bit aware of this stuff, but it's a weird conundrum, Deidre. It's that idea that everybody's saying, oh, look, there's going to be all these shovel-ready projects, there's all this coming. Reality of that is, how much of it are we going to get? How quickly will it come to light? And will it be enough to maintain the kind of staff and people? And, and you get into that avenue of it won't be ready now for 12 months and we've got to lay people off now because we can't sustain them for 12 months. And then you're going to have to go find them again. And it's a construction-wide issue in terms of procurement and program planning as a whole. So it's just the realities, unfortunately.
So you mentioned mental health being one of your biggies over the next little while. Is anything else on your radar that's sort of coming up? Obviously restructuring is pretty hard, and that relates to mental health as well. What else is on your horizon to manage Fletcher Building through these times?
Yeah.
From a health safety point of view, anyway.
Yeah, from a health and safety perspective, look, I think we just can't wait till things settle down and we can start to go back to just, caring for the people. We really want to get our reset back up and running because a lot of that will have positive impact on people's mental health. If we get really good, authentic line leadership where they're caring for the people and they're having really authentic, genuine conversations, that helps immensely with people's mental health and well-being. So My approach with mental health and the well-being space is provide people with lots of resources, let them pull it in as they will be, and then very much treating it like where people are employed with us, treating it like any other illness and how we can help them through our normal mechanisms. But in terms of where we're going as an organization, we just can't wait to get settled back down, because we just want to get back. I think people want that as well, that certainty. I've got a job, I've got a plan for the year, I need to get on and get it done. And that will give people a lot of mental well-being, I would suggest.
We've still got a bit of time for Q&A, so if you've got any more questions, fire them for the Q&A function. Just one for me, Wendy. Australia, obviously you're working Trans-Tasman. Are there any lessons or learnings, or both positive, not so positive, from Australia?
Yeah,
in your world?
The obvious not so positive is, boy, it's really important to have clarity of messaging from higher up, government in particular. So that was really challenging our first little while across Australia. It continues to be a challenge. You know, the border's open, the border's not open, you can travel, you can't travel, you know, we're going into emergency lockdown, we're not. So that was really quite challenging, and that's the problem you've got if you've got states or provinces. That's just the reality of governance structure, and you can feel how US has gotten into the same boat. We did try and pick up, you know, what are the learnings that we've got from our Australia team, because they kept working through all of this. So we kept, you know, looking to them for learnings, but they're pretty basic stuff that we're coming back through. And in fact, I'd suggest their approach was pretty, I don't want to say haphazard, because we didn't set expectations across the entire group in Australia while we were in lockdown. It became very much sort of grassroots led and state by state led. And there's been benefit, I think, in terms of having a much more stringent requirement across all. I think that clarity of messaging is just so important.
Cool. I don't imagine that, you probably know better than me, the union representation across your workforce or your subcontractors, did you? I imagine it's reasonably low. Did you do much with them during this period?
Look, we do have quite an active union force in some areas, and Australia has quite a group of them as well. As you can experience with unions, some are easier and more collaborative than others, but we did struggle a little bit, obviously, through the pay program rejig, where the challenge we had is we wanted to give our people as much certainty as we could. So we were the first organization, I think, to come out and say we're going to give our people certainty for 3 months. And we wanted to do that because for people's mental health, we wanted to be able to give them clarity of, you'll at least have some income for 3 months. And unfortunately that, you know, as you saw in the news, it's no surprise, it put the unions offside because they didn't get to really consult on that conversation. But we stuck by our guns that it was the right thing for our people. They needed more certainty and not for us to play politics.
Yep. Just a comment around the slides and the presentation. So there'll be something coming out next, probably sometime tomorrow, with an email with a link to the Wendy slides, a PDF of Wendy slides, and the recording of the presentation. So I think those are, any more questions, pop them in now. Otherwise, Wendy, any final comments?
I think the only thing, I mean,
advice?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things I think I tried to sort of reiterate back to my management team, executive team is, look, we came out of COVID with 0 cases. And with 15,000 people working in an environment which was constantly shifting and changing, and people coming back from all over the world, you know, that's a pretty amazing feat. And one of the things I didn't say, but I think also we forget the power of the expectations we set as organizations flow home. So the fact that we were taking such stringent care, for example, around international travel quite early, actually made people change their own personal behaviors. They stopped traveling so much. They started making different decisions about where they were going, who they were contacting. Did they have to go? Was it urgent? You know, were they taking care? Were they cleaning their hands really thoroughly? You know, they started to take a bit of ownership personally. So we didn't actually have any of our people get sick at all, not just at work, but also personally. And so I think we often forget the flow-on effect that we can have if we do it really well, if we've got really good compassionate, caring conversations, and people get it and it's authentic, then I think you can actually make a real big difference with people's lives at home as well.
Great, thanks for that, Wendy. That's a very interesting presentation. Certainly some things for me about mental health and potentially the growing impact of that. Like your point around the working impacting personal lives and personal health. And I like that COVID app, it's really quite sexy. Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you for your time today, and hope it goes well with you and your role and your family and Fletcher Building, and look forward to talking to you again. Thanks everybody. As I said, the presentation and the recording will be out shortly. Thanks for that. Have a good day.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone.